And not saying that bodybuilding or physique competitions are a bad idea, but I think sometimes when we take them to extremes, it can create really long-term consequences for what are short-term gains.
Welcome to the Team LogoFit Roundtable. I'm your host, Laurin Conlon. Each week, we share the evidence-based practices and communication-driven strategies we use with our clients and give you the tools you need to be successful for your life. This week, I'm joined by Rick, our mental health counselor, and we're going to discuss setting short and long-term goals, but particularly in the context of bodybuilding. And I know that sounds probably like a very strange topic, but there's a reason why we're addressing this. And like most of the topics that we come up with are either questions that are sent in or they are just trends that we're seeing with clients. Of course, sometimes the ones that we're doing are more just kind of like general like education. But this is a trend that you've been seeing recently with different types of clients and particularly different age ranges of clients who've been through things. So I want to talk about that first and then we'll kind of get more into it.
Yeah. To me, this was an episode that I really wanted to do with you because we've been doing these podcasts now for a little over a year together, I think. I don't remember when our first one was, but...
yeah, that one was so great.
It was. Train wreck all the way.
James
James
brought that up the other day to somebody and I was like dying of embarrassment. I was like, I can't believe you remember this and we're talking about this.
Go with James.
He like worked it into a conversation.
That's fantastic.
Great. So don't go back and listen to our first podcast ever, especially the YouTube. Don't watch that.
It was What is Therapy? I don't remember what episode. I think it was like 37, 36.
Oh, fuck off. I don't know.
Somewhere in there. The very first one where she implodes at the end of it. Anyway, like she's like sweating for a few seconds.
I'm going to start sweating now. Trends that you've been seeing with clients. Okay, let's go.
So it's not just something that I've seen recently. This has been a common trend since I've started working with more clients in this particular field who are coming to us from the bodybuilding industry. And so what I'm seeing is that, to put it into like, I guess, a nutshell, we have this kind of age range of clients. And what we're seeing is what's happening right now where clients are making decisions about their body, about what they want to look like, about what their goals are. They're making these decisions for here and now, today. And what I'm finding is that those same goals and what they're doing right now does not line up with where they eventually see themselves 10 years from now. And I want to bring this up because bodybuilding is a different sport from every other sport because of what it does to your body and your mind.
The two-part component is what is so challenging. And obviously every sport involves your body and your mind, but this is so different because of the subjective nature and because of the body fat and like the physiological side effects are just so broad. But what are the ranges of clients that you're seeing? Like, there's like three distinct that you like talked about. Primarily
what I'm seeing are we'll call them the mid-20s, the 24, 25, 26-year-old clients who are about that life. They are hardcore competitors. They really want to compete, and not just compete to have fun with it. They want to win, so they're really serious about it. The opposite end of that spectrum are the clients that are in their late 30s, early 40s, who are definitely at the tail end of their career, or not even competing at all anymore, and don't even have the desire to compete, but are struggling with their body, their physical health, and everything else that comes with years of competition life. And then there's the people who are kind of stuck in the middle, where they're like, I like competing, but I'm starting to see a pull toward some of the other things that I want, and I just don't know what to do. And again, this isn't about making decisions for people, but this is about something that I want to do to create awareness, because what I'm seeing a lot of is, like, it's this really weird thing where this person who's like 37 years old is like, if I could go back and do everything again, I would never have done some of the things that I did to my body for as long as I did them because of what it's doing to me now. And when I speak to the 25-year-olds, they're kind of like, yeah, I mean, that's so far off in the future, who cares? And I equate it to like smoking almost. Like, there's so many people who are like, oh, smoking is fun and it's easy and who cares? I don't have any health problems. Like, I'm totally fine. Until, like, you have emphysema and then you're like, oh, smoking was a bad idea. And not saying that bodybuilding or physique competitions are a bad idea, but I think sometimes when we take them to extremes, it can create really long-term consequences for what are short-term gains. And so I wanted to just kind of bring about this awareness with the people who are listening to this and being like, okay, this is a very real thing that I'm seeing play out. And I just wanted to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, because this is something that we weave this topic into so many different podcasts, but this might be the first time someone's listening to the podcast. So do want to talk about just kind of physique sports in general. So when we're talking about somebody getting on stage, regardless of the division, even if you are the highest body fat division, right? Like, we'll just say that, like, bikini typically isn't as lean as the other divisions. It is still very, very lean, right? Like, in contrast for, like, women's physique or women's bodybuilding versus bikini, yes, there are differences, but it's still likely past what is physiologically healthy for women. And the same goes for men as well. Men typically deal with less hormonal issues because men's hormones are not as complex. With women, you have to balance estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Whereas with men, it's typically just testosterone. And not that you don't have to regulate the other hormones, especially something like estrogen, but it's a lot easier to regulate in men than it is for women. There's this very, very delicate balance. And then what ends up unfortunately happening to most women, because they're typically smaller in size, they weigh less, they have less muscle mass. You typically have to be in a larger deficit, which is going to mean less food and more activity. And both of those things will typically throw off your cortisol. And we see a lot of women with very, very, very high cortisol levels, which can then affect your thyroid.
Cortisol is a stress hormone.
Yes. So all of these things, there's like this huge interplay between sex hormones, thyroid, and cortisol in women. And then we're starting to see other disruptions. Sleep, hair falling out, no sex drive, shitty relationship. There's like, it's this very, very unique thing. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen to men. It just typically happens on less of a scale. And especially if we're talking about natural women. And even if you are doing HRT to support all these things, getting super lean is hard on your body. Now, I will always preface this and say that there are certain individuals who are naturally leaner than others. We all know these people. We all know people who have fucking an 8-pack, barely work out, they eat like shit, and you're like, how? And then we all know the person who eats super healthy, trains every day, is very on top of it, and they might be at a heavier body than they like. They're probably healthy, but they don't maybe, right? So there's just always going to be the extremes. But most people are not going to be able to maintain like a stage leanness without trying. Like, it just doesn't really happen. You know what I mean? Unless there's a lot of drugs involved, which that gets dicey, of course, like over time, the more that you're doing those types of things. Like, if you're trying to live off T3 and Glen, you need to find a new perspective. So in any case, physique sports are very different because of physiologically what's going on. But then also there's like this really weird psychological mind fuck that's happening. Like, it's just crazy because as you're getting ready for the show, all anybody tells you is how good you look. Even the people who don't really like it, they're still commenting. So all you're getting is this like feedback constantly, negative and positive, but it's always feedback about you and your body. When's the next thing? When's the next thing? When's the next comp? All that. Forever. Until you're just pretty much done, and then nobody's gonna ask you. Like, nobody asks me anymore when I'm competing. They're just like, oh, okay. I still get it every once in a while, but most people are just kind of done asking. So there's always that. There's always like the interest in like your body and your physique and what you're doing next. And that's exciting because we always want goals. Most people who are going to get into bodybuilding are goal-driven people. 98% of them. There are some people who are just like, I just want to try and see if I like it. Most of those people don't even make it to the show though, because they're like, fuck this. This is crazy hard. Like, I'm not putting myself through all of this just for fun. So typically people who are doing bodybuilding shows are super goal-driven. Always like going after the next thing. And then when you get to the actual show, you are being judged on literally what you look like by strangers in a very vulnerable position. When you're like in this, tiny bikini or these small shorts, if you're a guy, posing trunks, whatever division you're in. So it's this very interesting thing that all kind of like collides together. And what happens afterwards is that your body, because you're at this really low body fat, physiologically there's a lot of things going on. Your body is trying to do everything in its power to gain body fat because it thinks that there's like something really bad happened. There must have been a famine because you haven't eaten a lot in a while and you're 9% body fat. And then psychologically, like that goal is done. Like the carrot, the stick, like all that's gone. And now everybody, oh, you've been working so hard, like we should go out. The same people who are telling you that like you looked amazing and they want to look like you and all this stuff. Now they're like, let's go get drinks. Let's go get dessert. Let's go out to eat every night. Let's go do this, right? And then you're pulled in all these directions. A few weeks later, you look up and you're like, oh shit, I don't like what my body looks like. I don't really have a goal. I kind of feel directionless. I'll do another show. That'll be a good idea. Yep. And this cycle perpetuates over and over and over again. So it's very unique in the sense it's just different than other sports, because in other sports, you know, it's you have a season, you have an in-season and an off-season, which technically you do for this as well. But there's a very distinct season. Like, okay, you're playing from May to September. Right. I don't do sports. So it's sometime, right? And then there's going to be an off-season period. There's going to be a period when there's a lot of downtime for you. There's going to be a period where you're doing easier training. And you have very distinct goals and very distinct timelines. And for most every other sport, there's a wide variety of body types in sports. But typically you're not dipping into this level of below kind of that like healthy amount of body fat. Nor are you just being typically judged on what you look like, right? There's going to be there are certainly subjective sports, but
the problem with it is your performance is simply how you look. Yes,
it's not based on, and I try to tell people this, we have clients who really, really struggle. Like, nobody cares that your prep was hard. I'm sorry, everybody's prep was hard. If you won an award for hardest working, then everybody would probably be awarded one, right? Like, that's just the reality. Everybody here worked hard. Some people certainly worked harder than others, and that's always going to be the way that it works. But everybody up here gave some amount of fucks to get up here. So you're not judged on how hard your prep was. And everything in your life could happen. Everything can be turned upside down, and it doesn't matter. You're not rewarded for that. So if you're only doing it because you want to be validated for that work, probably need to get there's plenty of other goals that we can attack that are a little bit more feasible and maybe won't be so mentally detrimental. But that's this really hard thing, because you have to train every day to, like, you want to win, obviously. Like, you're not just like, I am so hungry and tired and stressed out for no reason. I want to get last. Like, no, of course you're like, I'm trying to get first place. But then you also have to balance it with that realistic expectation of, like, I could get last place, and I have to be okay with that because I can still improve and I can make changes and I can make improvements. So there's a lot of reasons why physique sports are different, but there's not really a clear set in-season, off-season like there is. Like, you say, hey, I'm not prepping right now, or I am prepping, but you can fucking compete whenever you want. There's pretty much shows year-round. Obviously, certain areas of the world have less shows than others, but there's still a lot of shows, right? So, like, you have to be smart with it, because if you just say, I'm just going to do every show that I want to do, even the most genetically elite people that I've seen try and do that, they only last a few years at most. And then we see all these chicks, mental issues, gut issues, hormone issues, can't get pregnant, body's totally dysregulated.
Gone,
everything is just
I don't have a menstrual cycle for years.
So there's a lot of people who find themselves in this kind of position, right? And like you said, some people are kind of looking, I know a lot of people, not who you're talking about, but just people who are like, damn, like, I wish I maybe wouldn't have done, those things. But ultimately, you did them. So now you have to decide, okay, like, how are you going to attack it now? But this is talking to everybody as kind of like a disclaimer, almost like, hey, if you're trying to get into this or you're in the middle of it, like, setting those expectations of, like, short-term goals versus long-term goals, and, like, really, like, what goals do you want in your life? And that's what I think you really wanted to touch on. Yeah,
that's the part where, for the 25-year-olds that are out there and the 30-year-olds, the 30, 31, 32 that are still competing, what's important is, I think sometimes when we get into something, we make a decision to do something, whether that's early in our life or even a little bit later. You made the decision to do this. That's great. Because bodybuilding is such a different sport from everything else, like the guy who plays basketball, the guy who does baseball or volleyball, whatever sport they're playing, there's inherent risks with that, right? They're gonna blow out their knees. They're going to need surgery from time to time. They're going to have a bad back, or they're going to be sore, or they might have arthritis. But like by and large, their life is going to be okay. They're still going to be able to function. They're going to be relatively healthy. You know, they aren't doing things to their body in such a way that it's going to change to a large degree the outcome of their life later. And so what I see with this, and again, I think you talked about it, it's more with female clients than it is the male bodybuilders. They still have their own issues.
Yes, certainly. I don't want to downplay that. But metabolically, things typically, on a general scale, are skewed harsher towards women.
What I would prefer, what I would really like, is for people who are competing right now, I would like you to stop sacrificing today stop sacrificing your future for just what you can accomplish today. What I'd like you to do is I would like you just to have an open mind to the idea of just asking yourself, right, I'm 25 right now. What am I going to want when I'm 35? What am I going to want when I'm 45? To put this in perspective, I think I've done this on one other podcast. I don't remember what it was, which one, but like I'm 41 years old right now. I can go back to when I was 31 and my goals and ambitions were very different than what I want right now. And I can take that back 10 years. When I was 21 years old, my goals and ambitions were very different than they are at 31 and at 41. You take that back another 10 years. When you were 11 years old, you had a different perspective and outlook on life. And so right now you're 25 and this is a goal for you. And I'm not saying don't go for that goal. I'm not shitting on this sport at all. I'm just telling you guys that your sport comes with inherent risks. Like if you're like, I really want a family. Great. I'm glad that you want that family. But what you're doing in this sport right now could dramatically impact your ability to have them later versus the basketball player who's like, yep, I want kids. And it's like, okay, they can have kids whenever they want. Because the basketball player is not cutting weight. They're not doing all these other things that are getting them to a space where they're having to live in a very unhealthy body leanness.
Now, there certainly are other sports too, right? If you're a gymnast, if you're a dancer, cross-country runner, there are certainly sports that, and that's where we get the female athlete
athletes in general.
Like, a lot of times, and that's again because there's this very delicate interplay of everything together that affects women more than it affects men. And so it's not just exclusive here, but most of those things, again, not always, but most of the time, people are doing those types of sports for a few years of their life. And then they maybe, just do it kind of as a hobby later on, right? Like, let's say you do cross country in high school, maybe college. The chances of going to the Olympics or being a professional cross country athlete are really, really small. Like the amount of people that do that is not very large.
Right.
Versus anybody you could say, hey, I want to do a show next year. Say, okay. I'm like, that'd be so great. Anyways.
For who? Not for me.
Anyways, clearly not happening, but let's just say that you wanted to do this, right? You had the desire
Absolutely.
to get on stage.
I'm ready.
Right now.
Right now. Get the baby oil out. Let's do this.
Oh my God. Oh no. Not baby oil. Okay. But
that's what it'll be for my show.
Okay.
It'll be baby oil. I want the other competitors slipping and sliding.
Yes, they just like all break their legs so you win. Okay. That's how you win your show.
I'm good with it. I got the trophy to prove it.
But let's say you wanted to do that, right? Technically, there's nothing stopping you, right? Like maybe like somebody might be like, hey, like you might need a few years to like be competitive. You know what I'm saying?
I get you.
You could compete. Yeah. There's no barrier to entry, and certain divisions have less of a barrier to entry than others. So we talked about this a little bit before the show, but so when people used to think about bodybuilders, right, there was this big stigma of like, oh, they're like these super jacked people, like these huge meatheads, they got to walk around with their food all the time, like they're 300 pounds in the off season, and even the girls, like even in like the female bodybuilders and all that kind of era, like you were kind of a freak, like, back in the day, like that's what you were, it was not normal. It's not mainstream. And I'm not going to pretend that bodybuilding is mainstream by any means now, but it is certainly much more accepted and way more people compete now.
Yes.
And there are way more divisions. So if you look at men's physique, if you look at bikini, those are very low barrier to entry divisions.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they started. If you look when bikini started in 2009, it is vastly different than it is today. So the barrier to entry has risen a lot, like exceptionally risen. And if you look at the top competitors, it's not just an easier barrier to entry. Like they are high level, like genetically, predisposed to have certain, look a certain way. They've worked their asses off. They've been doing it for years. Like that's why they're up there. You know what I mean? It's no longer just like, oh yeah, I could like do a diet and like win the Olympia.
Mm-hmm.
That's not happening. Even in bikini, which used to be so easy. But what happened, I think what the lack has been is that the mindset hasn't really changed.
Right.
The mindset of, oh, well, I can just do this. I just need to get leaner, because a lot of times, yeah, you might need to get leaner, right? Like getting as lean as necessary is pretty hard, but you also have to have enough muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And people just think it's always like a leanness game. And it's like, I can diet somebody all the way down, but guess what? You're not going to look that good because you don't have enough muscle, right? But so regardless, this isn't just about like all of that, but I think that mindset of like, oh, anybody can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you can just compete all the time because it's a healthy, sustainable physique. A few years ago, that crossed over and it's no longer there. You know what I mean? Like this is no longer a sustainable, easy to accomplish physique. Like if you're looking at the top girls for the past few years, that is not something that is easy or sustainable.
Right.
So we need to shift our mindset from that. And I don't think that we've caught up because the difference, again, with bikini in particular, and I'm not picking on bikini competitors, but the difference of bikini versus other divisions is you can look at any bikini competitor who's a top level girl and be like, oh, I would want to look like that. Like that looks normal.
Mm-hmm.
That looks like if you're wearing regular clothes, like it's not like, like, oh my gosh, that girl's back is so big or what, like, oh, she has very feminine, she's muscular, she's lean, but like she still has curves. Like it's a nice look.
Mm-hmm.
So people see that and they think, oh, I want to look like that year round. I can do that.
Yeah.
So there's so many like mental disconnects here that like just perpetuate, especially in bikini. And, I've tried to bring this up and, I've been trying to find my ways of saying it because I think probably when I first started, I was coming off very abrasive. Me, abrasive. But whenever you bring this up, people think that you're just bashing competing. Like, you don't get it. It's like, no. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Competed for 8 years. I've been coaching people for 8 years. I fully understand the sport.
Yeah.
And this is not a bash on it at all. I think it's amazing. There are so many positive things to competing. But to Rick's point is you have to think about these things not just in the short term of like, what can I do right now, but how is this affecting me? Because when you are 25 or younger or even older, maybe you don't know what you want yet. But if it's even like an inkling of a possibility, which for most people it is, like you want to have a career, you want to have a family, you want to get married, you want to have healthy relationships in your life. Those are all things that like most people want. I understand having kids, not having kids.
Yeah, we're not talking about the outliers here. We're talking about by and large the masses.
Most people want that. And, you putting all of the short-term goals before all that in the short term is fine, you know what I mean? But you really have to think, how is this affecting me?
Right. And I think to that point, it's learning how to create a balance that is healthy. There's going to be risks involved in anything.
Yes.
And so there's an inherent risk with this. And it's a risk that is different from other sports for the reasons that we've already discussed. And so, I had a professor one time talk about how, like, on one hand, we make the past seem like everything. And then at the same time, we can dismiss the past as being completely meaningless. And, so like he had everybody bring in something from their past. And so everybody found something that was like kind of meaningful. But, in looking at some of that stuff, you're like, if you go back and you look at and you grab like your trophies from like when you were 16 years old and it was like the sophomore year cross country team and you're like, is that valuable? Like, what would you have given up today to still have accomplished that? And a lot of people are kind of like searching and they're like, well, not much. I wouldn't give up much of what I have today to still have that accomplishment. Now, experiences shape our character and develop, and so like it's an intangible thing, but sometimes it's just kind of like asking yourself that question. Like the last competition that I did, like as I was moving recently, like I ended up throwing out all my medals, all the belts, all the old trophies and stuff because I'm like, why am I lugging all this around? I don't care about it. Like I know I had the experience, I know what I did, how I performed, and that's that. but I got rid of all of it. It was stuff that I didn't need to move. And so it's just kind of like, if you can't look at yourself today and say, today is worth the sacrifice of having that same accomplishment, the ability for you to project yourself into the future and to think about the future in meaningful terms. This is important for you guys to do with your sport, because we're not just talking about a hip replacement here. We're not just talking about an ACL surgery or something like that that can be done and over with and your life moves on. We're talking about your ability to have meaningful relationships. We're talking about your physical health. We're talking about your ability to have children, and children is a lifelong thing. And so, yeah, if you made the decisions and you're dealing with that now, so be it. It is there. But it's just like, it's this space that I see people sacrificing the future for what they want right here, right now, which ultimately for many of us won't mean the same thing in 5 years, 10 years. And so I just wanted people to kind of have that perspective to be like, all right, am I sacrificing too much now for something that won't have any real value for me later?
And
because that's a hard thing for people to reconcile.
It's such a hard place to like balance between, right? Because everything in life requires sacrifice, right? So you could say, oh, well, why am I staying up late to like work on this project? Like, it doesn't mean anything. But that project might be the catalyst for your career change, or becoming a CEO, or the next big thing, right? Like whatever it is. Or getting ready for this competition and winning it might completely change your life. And not because of the competition, but because of the other downstream things. So it's not to downplay having really hard goals and making big sacrifices towards it.
Correct.
But it's also understanding that there is a cost to everything. And just simply being aware of that cost, I think, is what needs to happen. Because a lot of people get into this, unfortunately, thinking that it's just all great, that it's just all glamour, and that they're just going to look good and it's going to be really fun. Because when you do talk about the negative things, people think that you're either bashing it or you're complaining. And then, I mean, again, like nobody wants to see you fucking complain every day. Like, again, get over it. Like, this is crap. You chose to do this. So, again, there's a balance there too, right? Like showing how much of like this side of it as well. But I think that it's just important to recognize, okay, like there are going to be a few things that you are probably going to want in life. Yeah. And maybe you don't know, because like most people don't know when they're younger. And this is exactly what I want. Like, no.
If you don't know, that's all the more reason for you to have this conversation with yourself now.
Yeah.
If you do know and you're like dead set on that stuff, this is probably an easier conversation, because you might be like, all right, well, I know what I want. And if what I'm doing today isn't helping me get what I want tomorrow, I would question why I'm doing it. But for those of you that don't know what you want, you're like, I don't know if I want kids, I don't know if I want a family, I don't know if I want to be married, or whatever it is. All the more reason for you to stop and take pause, because one day those things will become abundantly clear to you. I promise you, with enough time and a few more experiences, whatever they are, good or bad, that'll tell you very quickly what you want. And what I don't want is for more people to have to be like, I wish I could have gone back and done this differently. Because I think there's a way to do this sport responsibly, and I don't know. I think been talking to you and a few of the other coaches that I do know, there's enough shitty coaches out there that are fucking people up all day, every day for years, and then all of a sudden they're like,
die doing this.
I know that, and that's like I've been going down.
There's been 4 people who've died recently.
Thank you. Okay, I didn't want to bring it up, but I remember I was reading about the stuff, and I'm like, there's 2 women, 2 men. I think that I just recently heard that
there's 3 girls that just died, and a 4th in the ICU. And
there's other people who
have, I'm not just like,
but they're young. They're like 28, 25, 26.
You make your choices, right? If somebody says, hey, take this, you decide to do it or not, right? Like, I'm never going to put all of the blame on one person, whether it's the coach or the organization or the judges or whatever, right? It is ultimately your decision. But being informed, you know what I mean, and just having all the facts, then you can decide, okay, oh, Rick gave me this. All right, let me look into this. Asking you, okay, normal questions. Why should I be taking this? What are the risks? What are the benefits? What could we do besides this? And then looking up what else is going on, and thinking not just in one term, not just one time, but are you doing this multiple times, right? Obviously, in the bodybuilding industry, it's no fucking secret that a lot of people deal with kidney issues, and it's because of abusing diuretics and all of the crazy stuff that happens.
There was a woman who just died. She was abusing diuretics.
Yes, and this happens because why? Of course, the sport gets more crazy. Everybody needs to dry out, be super late, the whole thing. So I get it. I'm not going to say that, oh, that was, exclusively the coach's fault. Like, no, she decided to take it.
Yeah.
But again, it's understanding, okay, short term versus long term. What else could we do? And hey, if you decide that's your fucking risk, and there you go. That you made your decision. You know what I mean? But I think a lot of people get into this who don't know, and I hear these horror stories still in 2021 with people who, oh, I did this prep with this coach and XYZ happened. How the fuck? This is your first show. Why was this even like on the menu? You know what I mean? Like, why was this even like a factor? And I did want to bring up the girl I was telling you about. So Shanique Grant, if anybody knows her, she's has an amazing physique. She started competing several years ago and, won a few physique Olympias. And I mean, arguably, like, you looked at her and you're like, you're a physique champion. Like through and through, like, that's the division right there. And most people said, oh, she can go on and win, 10 plus titles and be like one of these, really, really high level competitors. And, she competed for, I think 7 or 8 years. Turned pro pretty quickly, won pro shows, won 2 Olympias and got second at her third, I believe, but something along the lines. Pretty successful. And then after the last one, she retired. She said, I want to have kids. And she's been very open. I'm not taking any gear anymore. I've completely downsized. I mean, she's obviously muscular, but, I'm, all these things. This is what I'm doing. And people are like, oh, you retired because you didn't win. She's like, no, I'm 26 and I want a family at some point, and I understand what I'm doing,
my body now
has these
has
risks.
to be recuperated.
You know what I mean? And does that mean that she's never going to compete again? No. Does that mean that maybe she could decide, maybe I really don't want kids. Maybe I want to do, and that's up for her, again, to make that decision. But it was just very interesting to see people, like how the response was to that. And I think it was just a really good example of all this. Like, she's at like the pinnacle of the sport. Again, arguably one of the best physiques I've ever seen. So much potential. And she is so young. So she could be doing this for years and years and years and winning all these titles, be making her living off of this.
Yes.
But at what expense to her, for her long-term health and for, fertility and her family and relationships and all this. So I think that just taking a step back, and it's really hard because I get it when we talk about short versus long-term goals, when we talk about being a competitor, like I get it because both of us have competed, like that competitive drive when you want to compete, like you want to win, you want to be successful, you want to keep going. But you have to look at it in the context of this bigger picture. And there are plenty of people who were successful competitors who don't run their faces into the ground, who don't completely burn themselves out. It's not as many as it should be, you know what I mean? Because it is harder. It's hard to take a 2-year off season. But some people need that. Yeah. So sometimes people don't need that. Sometimes people can be back to back. Hey, we didn't really have a lot of adaptations this prep. You don't really need to make any changes. Let's jump into a prep relatively soon. That can happen. Other times it's like, hey, we got to take at least a year off before we can diet again. Right. And that's going to depend on the client. And so it's really hard to give like timelines or examples.
Yeah, and I don't know if the timeline is even the right thing, but I love the example of that competitor that you talked about, because it's like she clearly had the fire and the desire and even the genetic predisposition to excel in that sport. And she got to a space where what's interesting is the person who has it all, and then we have all these other people who would like kill to be in her position, who are going to continue to push their body to such crazy extreme limits to get what she had. Because I think sometimes with sports in general is that we can be chasing the wrong goals instead of prioritizing what it's really about. And it's not necessarily about the experience as much as it is for some people. They're like, I just want to be the best. I want to have the medals. And it's like we kind of lose ourselves in that process.
Yeah. And there is a way to do this that is still very fulfilling competitively, but also not at the expense of everything else in your life. Right. And it is much harder. And it is much harder to do that, but it is possible.
Who was you'll probably know, I might mispronounce his name. Was it Rich Pena?
Rich Piana.
Piana, okay. See, I know I messed it up. I've followed him, or what he used to, I know he's deceased now, but he used to have this like tagline, right? Whatever it takes. So like when you watch his videos, and it's clear that this guy injected, I mean, he's got open videos of him talking about all the different stuff.
Oh, yeah.
would put into his body. But it's like, okay,
It's funny because he doesn't really compete either, which is like,
huh?
it's like he doesn't really like compete.
No, he talks about that too. He's like,
Yeah.
I've retired from that. He's like, I want to look the way I want to look.
Yeah.
He's like, I want to look like a muscled freak and all this kind of stuff. But the idea of whatever it takes cost him everything, you know. And now maybe he doesn't have any regrets. If somebody could, you know, resurrect him and be like, would you do it all again? Maybe not. But like his life was cut short. And there are things that he won't ever get a chance to experience. And for those of us, that mentality is a very dangerous mentality because, like I said, for most other sports, the whatever it takes mentality doesn't result in them having major consequences to their future, right? They might be a little more arthritic. They might be slow. They might have some things that they're going to have to deal with and issues they're going to have to overcome as a result of their athletic career, no doubt.
I'm like, all my dad's friends.
Yeah, well, your dad was a pro football player, right? So there's inherent risks that come with that as well. But this is unique in that sense. And so the whatever it takes mentality is like, this can cost you, and that whatever it takes is going to cost you parts of your future if you're not careful with this.
Yeah.
And so this was just, I wanted to have this discussion because I think I don't have your insight and your knowledge in terms of the competition and the physique side of things. But what I'm seeing with clients is this, like, this spectrum of, I'm going to do whatever it takes right now to do this and get this what I want. But then this, like, the 10-year people who are in front of them, they're like, none of that was worth what I'm giving up now. And so it's just kind of like, how do I get you two to talk? You know, and I can't
Set up an anonymous meeting.
other than through this medium, you know, where I can say to you guys, like, I would ask you to do your best to sit down and have those conversations with yourself and discuss what is going to be important for my future. Is what I'm doing now going to help me accomplish that? And if it's not, fine. But what can I do to help minimize the risks? Because, you know, for those of you that want certain things, I promise you what you want right now won't have the same inherent value as it will 10 years from now. And if you can't make that, if you can't look at something in your life and say, yes, this was worth holding it in your hand, was worth everything I'm giving up now, then it's not as important as you think it is, or the priority that you're making it out to be right now.
And it doesn't mean that you can't compete.
Correct.
It doesn't mean that you can't strive to win.
Right.
It just means that you might need to take a different approach and a more long-term approach. And I think that everybody could take a page out of the, like, natural male bodybuilding group, right? I happen to know a lot of them. And it's always interesting because you see it's such a different culture when you talk about this group of people. And I mean, they're notorious for taking 2, 3, 4-year off seasons and coming back and competing in their 50s, looking amazing and getting better every time you see them. Yeah. And it is just, it's very different than, you know, some of the other organizations and some of the other categories. And it's understandable. Again, there are going to always be differences, you know what I mean? But I think that a lot of us could learn from that and be like, wow, okay, like this person, you know, there's a great example. His name's Brian Whitaker. He's been very successful for quite some time. He's a professor at a college, you know, does research, teaches, and has a family, puts all of that first. Like, work and family are number one, and bodybuilding is 3 to him. It's like family, work, bodybuilding. And he still happened to win all of these things, right? So, and not to say that, you know, his success is more important than other people. It's just as an example to show, okay, he's been doing this for a long time. And I understand there are many, many differences between organizations and categories and all that. So it's not like a direct comparison, but you can see how somebody who is very successful at their peak can function still at a high level, you know, with their family, with their career, and with their relationships. Yeah. So, you know, this is not to scare anybody from competing. I think, again, it's an amazing goal and there's so many positives that can come from it. But having an intelligent and long-term approach is really important, as with everything. But, you know, really thinking about, okay, how is this going to impact future me? And just kind of detaching a little bit, which is really hard when you're younger because it doesn't affect you as much. And the first few seasons of preps that I did, like, didn't matter. Oh, I had a shitty few week off season, few month off season. Okay, I can get right back into it. Didn't matter. Bounced right back. And that's what happens to a lot of people. They bounce. And then you hit a point or one prep, you're like, oh, this isn't working how it used to work. And then what most people do is they just trickle down because that's what we're really good at. And then when you do get your head up from everything, you're like, oh, oh, this is a mess now.
Yeah.
And it might take some time. So you guys have heard me, if you listen to the podcast, like I talk about it, like they're more like compounding adaptations. So the more you do it, the longer that you do it, they compound in a really negative way. So sometimes it doesn't seem fair how quickly those adaptations can come on, but really it was a byproduct of the past 5 years. And now it's just kind of caught up to you. We see the same thing with, general pop clients too. Like a lifestyle client who, a chick who's been off and on dieting for 20 years of her life. There's going to be some built up adaptations here that we're going to have to work through. And even though you weren't doing a competition prep, you were still dieting, crash dieting, not training, losing muscle, not eating properly. That adds up. So you can't just expect to do a 3-month program and like your body is exactly where you want it to be when you look back on it. So in any case, we just wanted to bring awareness to this, and this is a trend that you've been seeing consistently for over a year. So this is not just like a 1 or 2 person thing. No. It's a very, very consistent. We've had many conversations about this, and like it's just finally we wanted to talk about it. Yeah. And again, just bring awareness to everything. So if you guys are interested in talking with Rick, I will put his contact information in the show notes. If you have a question for us that you would specifically like answered, there is also a link for that as well. And if you like the show, please share it. Please subscribe. That really helps us get our message out. And we will talk to you guys next week.